Welcome back, listeners, to another episode of Mythosbusters Miskatonic AV Club, where we review cards from the Carcosa box set, which, Sean, I believe came out approximately 8 years ago.
Sure seems like it.
We have really fallen behind on AV Club, but part of relaunching this, it's going with our Patreon. We want to really get ourselves back in the driver's seat, and I'm kind of spearheading the movement to get us all caught up. Which
Let's be truthful with our listeners here. We were debating pretty strongly giving the AV Club the Warriors' death it deserved, but none of us could swing the sword, so here we are.
Yeah, pretty much. I've loved it forever, but I mean, time just gets sucked away when you have a job and kids and a podcast aside from AV Club.
Turns out.
Mm-hmm. So we've also enlisted, with me is Sean, of course. Hi, Sean.
Hi, it's me. Oh, God. Maybe better if I don't knock over my microphone immediately. All right.
We're probably going to enlist the help of some, what we call Mythosbusters interns. So a few listeners that are avid in...
Actually, I'd have to say that now that interns are officially part of our Patreon, we have to call them like independent contractors.
Okay, Mythosbusters.
Unless they are indeed patrons at the intern level, then they've earned it.
Yeah. Anyways, you might hear a few voices that aren't the normal Mythosbusters, and they'll be helping us kind of catch up with the AV Club as we see fit, because we have all different schedules and stuff, and having a big pool of people is a lot easier than having a pool of 4 people. So,
accurate.
Without further ado, shall we get on to the brand new Path to Carcosa Guardian player cards?
I got to get my year and a half ago hat back on because we try to review these cards in the meta that they released. So
yeah, well, I mean, I think I'm okay with jumping ahead a bit and looking at them in current times, but whatever the kids want.
We'll caveat when we do it, at least.
Yeah. So Sean, why don't you read, because you played him at Arkham Knights, why don't you read Mark Harrigan?
So Mark Harrigan is the soldier. He is our Guardian investigator. He has the veteran trait. He has 3 willpower, 2 intellect, 5 combat, and 3 agility. You begin the game with Sophie in loving memory in play. And reaction after damage is placed on a card you control, draw 1 card. Limit once per phase. His Elder Sign ability is +1 for each damage on Mark. And then he has 9 health and 5 sanity. And then I suppose covering his deck, he's got a deck size of 30. He can take Guardian cards 0 to 5, neutral cards 0 to 5, tactic cards at level 0. And then he starts with the Homefront, Shell Shock, Sophie, and 1 random basic weakness, as you might expect.
So, Mark kills things.
He sure does.
Tell me about your experience playing him. You played him Iron Man last year at Arkham.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I played the role of primary killer for a 4-player group, which kept me busy, but I never felt like I didn't have a thing to do. Mark is he's that wonderful power gamery killer. Like, you've got Roland, who's a phenomenally well-rounded investigator, both in his stats and what he has access to. You've got Zoe, who I can't remember exactly what we said about Zoe. Probably that playing solo Zoe is a bad idea, so player as a killer, maybe flex. But I would say whatever we said about Zoe to that effect applies even more to Mark.
Mm-hmm.
But that said, his ability to draw cards is insane.
Yeah.
It's so good. And when you build for the idea that you're just going to have a lot of cards that can soak and take damage, your Brother Xavier's, your True Grits, which we'll get to, those sorts of things, you can just draw a ton of cards. And when you can draw a lot of cards, you can kind of play around with, I guess, what would otherwise be more marginalized effects, because I had more one-ofs in my deck that I would never have put in Zoe or Roland, because I knew it's not going to gum up the works and I'm not going to get to my Colt fast enough because Mark's just going to draw a ton of cards. So
yeah, like he almost rivals Seekers in card draw.
Mm-hmm.
And he's not even playing cards to do it, right? And I think that the cards you mentioned that are great soaks, Brother X, True Grit, I'd even throw Beat Cop and Guard Dog in there.
Oh yes,
They're cards you would play as Guardian regardless.
yeah,
It's just that Mark all of a sudden makes them better.
yep. And the nice thing about it is since you can draw so aggressively, we'll get to the weakness in a second, I'm sure, but I've had it work a lot of times where I'm drawing so aggressively and kind of keeping on top of my monsters that his signature weakness ends up whiffing and or having a minimal effect most of the time, which is pretty cool.
Well, let's talk about his weakness then. It's a treachery, shell shock, it's a flaw, and revelation. For every 2 damage on you, take 1 horror.
So yeah, early game, not doing a whole lot.
Mm-hmm.
If you pull this late game and you're hurting, it could be a knockout punch. But I have to say, it's never knocked me out in my personal play with Mark, and at worst, it's just made me play faster.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I find because it's not a complete knockout very early in the game. It's not bad. Like if you're really staying on top of your damage input with healing and such, which you should be with Mark, it can be quite a weakness. It's not as scary.
Mm-hmm. And what's nice is it's one of those weaknesses that you drew it, it hits you for whatever it hits you, and then you're done. You're just done. It's not cover up or Lost for Izzy where like now it has to be on my mind as to how I'm going to fix this for the rest of the game. And I think it further enforces Mark's ability to just keep on keeping on and keep on smashing enemies in the face.
Mm-hmm. And the great thing too is it's not direct horror. Like you can just, if Brother X is out, you can just tank it on him as well. So.
Mm-hmm.
I just realized I forgot to put Sophie up here. Apparently she's an important card in Mark. I'll read Homefront for now if you want to grab Sophie, so you can read her out. And luckily, the audio listeners it'll look like nothing happened or sound like nothing happened.
In effect.
Yeah. So one of his signatures, Homefront, is a skill. It's practiced and expert, and oh my god, of course it's an expert. You have 4 combat icons on this card, which is just insane. Mark Harrigan's deck only, and if this skill test is successful during an attack, move 1 damage from Mark Harrigan to the attacked enemy. So it's like Vicious Blow, but with a bunch more fists, and it also heals you.
Which, when you want to take damage to trigger your other effects, that's solid.
Mm-hmm. And it helps you stay away from Shell Shock a bit as well. And I mean, the 4 fists is just...
You're hitting whatever you're swinging at.
Yeah. And this can be used to... Like, it says if this skill test is successful during an attack. So it could be someone you're committing this... Like, someone else is fighting. And it still moves 1 damage from Mark to the attacked enemy. So let's say Daisy is fighting one of those 2/2/2 ghouls. She can just attack. You throw in Homefront, and her attack does 1. The Homefront does 1. And 5/2 is a pretty good swing. So
yeah, and it's one of those things where it's kind of cool to see the signature actually kind of fight against the signature weakness, which is pretty cool. And if this skill card just existed in the card pool, that would be an auto include in basically everyone. So despite the fact that it synergizes really well with Mark, it is a good card by itself.
Mm-hmm. And I think the artwork, I mean, you see Shell Shock in the World War I trenches, and then you look at the Homefront, and he's just, holding a giant gun, lighting a cigarette, like, bring it on. Pretty sweet.
There's probably an explosion in the background, but Mark's not looking at it, so we don't get to see it.
Or there's an explosion about to be happening when he flicks the match backwards and walks away slowly.
Yes.
So the biggest thing about Mark, Sophie.
Mm-hmm. So Sophie, which is a signature asset that gets to start in play, which is pretty cool. So Sophie, in loving memory, is null costed. It kind of acts like a permanent asset, more or less. So Mark Harrigan deck only. Sophie cannot leave play. Fast action. Take 1 direct damage. You get +2 to your skill value for this test. And then forced. If Mark Harrigan has 5 or more damage on him, flip Sophie. On the other side, flipped Sophie is Sophie. It was all my fault. She's now her weakness in item and madness. And then Sophie cannot leave play. You get -1 to each of your skills, and then forced if Mark Harrigan has 4 or less damage on him. Flip Sophie. Oh, Sophie.
Sophie.
I feel like Mark's super playable even if Sophie didn't exist, but the fact that just kind of at will you can decide, I'm going to get +2 and draw a card right now.
Mm-hmm.
That's a good ability to have.
Especially in the Mythos phase, when you might get some sort of treachery that's testing your will, and you might not have will pips. And a lot of those treacheries are around 3-ish, right? Like Grasping Hands, Crypt Chill, all this stuff. To be able to go +2, draw a card, maybe you get a will icon and commit that. Like, it just... Yeah. For the cost of 1 damage...
Exactly. It's kind of like you take a damage to just randomly spawn an unexpected courage in your hand a few times a game.
Mm-hmm.
Which is really good.
Yeah. Now, I mean, with the flip side, you do have to balance it quite a bit, and I think if you get a little bit overzealous, you can find yourself in a very precarious position. So I think healing is something you definitely want to have a lot of in Mark Harrigan's deck, and I think you took First Aid. And what's that one that heals 2 damage to you?
I actually did not take First Aid. I found I still think First Aid is too slow, even for Mark. I'd rather but that's a different debate. No, but Emergency Aid and then just a ton of assets that soak other damage, and that was enough. I think in our Iron Man Dunwich run, there was only one scenario where I was kind of like getting out of it with my tail between my legs because Sophie had flipped. Every other scenario I ended with in loving memory face up. So I will say though, that interplay between flipping Sophie and keeping your damage at a certain level, that kind of governs how you play Mark a lot more than his signature Shell Shock does.
Yeah.
So yeah, and I would agree that it definitely keeps it in check. You can't get too crazy with it, but as long as you pack ample healing, it's very manageable.
Mm-hmm. I think one of the only complaints, and it's a very small complaint I have about Mark as a whole, is he's very much a one-trick pony, right? Like, he kills things. But that's about it. Like, I tried solo Mark a little bit. It was horrible. But I'm okay with that. Like, he is not meant to be a solo investigator. He's meant to be that killer. And he does it very well. So.
And he is that.
Yeah. All right. I know you use this card a lot in our campaign. Why don't you read the Colt?
Sure thing. So the 32 Colt is a Guardian level 0 asset. It's 3 cost, has 1 combat pip, item, weapon, and firearm traded. It uses 6 ammo. Action, spend 1 ammo. Fight, you deal +1 damage for this attack. And it takes up 1 hand slot. Even after the introduction of the semi-automatic, many police officers and private gun owners prefer the reliability of a revolver. And I know I sure did.
Oh boy.
So this card as a weapon, I'll just do the obvious things here. You need an investigator who can hit a high combat number on their own with other things than the gun, right? Because you're comparing this against like the 45, which gives you a combat boost, doesn't have as much ammo. This also costs less, which is nice. You compare it against the machete. Honestly, I think as long as you've got an investigator who can get, again, to that high combat value, this is better than machete in most cases. I know that's sacrilege to say, but I could say I just very rarely ran out.
Mm-hmm.
That said, I was offhanding machete, so maybe that's not the best example. But that said, 6 ammos, that's a lot of uses out of a single weapon for 3 cost.
And perfect that we're talking about Mark, because I feel like it's almost like they designed this to go with Mark.
Yes.
Having that 5 attack, you get a beat cop out, now you're at 6 naturally. There's a lot of enemies, especially at the standard level, where you'd feel okay attacking with a 6 of combat. And I know there was tons of times during our campaign where I'm like, oh man, can you help me out? And you're like, yeah, sure. I have 6 naturally. I'm 3 up. I'm not putting anything in. And you just
Hope
kill
I don't hit
things.
you. Sorry.
Yeah. You only shot us like 3 times.
I blasted Lola in the face at one point. That was pretty fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's actually funny. I'm looking at these cards. I'm pulling them up on Arkham DB right now, and the top review for this card is actually kind of scathing. And yeah, if you compare it against Machete, in every investigator that has access to both, Machete is generally going to come out better,
Oh, yeah.
particularly if you play solo a lot. But if you're
Mhm.
playing multiplayer or you're specializing in high count multiplayer for sure, and then even if you're specializing in lower count multiplayer, this is a really solid weapon. Just again with the proviso that you're getting your combat boost elsewhere.
Yeah. Machete is, it's been so long that we've used it as kind of the default weapon to compare against. And I don't think it's wrong to do that. I think the 45 also is kind of in that same place. Like those are the 2 weapons we constantly compare things to. I think the
I do
Colt.
think.
What?
Sorry, just as a quick strike down for Machete here, I do think that the community in general overvalues Machete because I feel like the community is made up of mostly solo players.
That's
If you've
true.
ever played 2, or maybe not so much at 2-player, but if you've ever played 3-player plus and your role is to kill things, you'd be surprised at, oh, you might not be surprised at how often that damage bonus for Machete just gets turned off because you're trying to do what you're trying to do. And most times, again, as long as I can get to that combat value, I'd rather have the Colt.
Mm-hmm. I think Colt works really well as well with what's the new blessed ammunition or the
Yeah.
something like that. It basically turns it into a 45 automatic.
Yeah, or reliable.
Yeah. So Colt 32, really good card. I think it takes a specific investigator to take it. You probably want someone with at least 4 combat to start and something you can boost up. And then you can also add a few tricks onto the 32 Colt to make it super reliable. Wink, wink. All right.
Approved.
Our next card is still a Guardian asset. It is True Grit, the 3-cost asset. It is a talent, and it's got a willpower pip. True Grit may be assigned damage dealt to other investigators at your location. It's got 3 health and null sanity, and the flavor text: "'Tis just a flesh wound." Although looking at where that blood is, I don't think that is a flesh
That
wound.
looks like a weeping stomach wound to me,
Yeah,
but
that is
that's my amateur eye.
that's a central body wound right there. I think this is an awesome card, especially for Mark, obviously, because this gets him to draw cards. You can help protect the other investigators, some that may be a little bit more squishy.
Yeah, I love this in a Guardian build where that Guardian's job is to go around and hold the hand of the Clover.
Mm-hmm.
Because, you can do your best to pull enemies off him, but there are still things that are going to deal damage to that Clover. And if that Clover is like, Daisy,
Yeah.
she's kind of squishy. And she also doesn't have a whole lot by way of avoiding and or healing damage once it's there, at least not in any efficient way. So just being able to say, nope, I'll just tank it right off you. I will say, though, I've included this in Mark. I've included it in Zoe. I've never included it anywhere else.
Yeah, I think it's super niche, right? Like I don't think you ever take this as a card that you want in solo or 2 players where you're just using it for yourself. I think it's a multiplayer card, and I think it's also a multiplayer card for the person who's specializing in protecting everyone else. If you have that as a specialty in your 4-player group, if you don't have a protect everyone person, I think this card loses a lot of value.
It's expensive in that case for what it does.
Yeah, the 3 cost is quite high for just 3 health. Like, there's better things you can spend the 3 on.
Yep.
It's when you want the ability to tank damage from other people.
Yep.
And it also doesn't take up a slot, which is really nice, actually.
Very, very nice.
Yeah.
Guardian slots are at a premium.
They are.
Yeah, I don't really have a whole lot else to say about this one.
Yeah.
Just repeat what you said. If you're tanking, this is a great card to do it.
Yep. All right. Do you want to handle this next one?
Let me handle this, Scott.
Okay.
So let me handle this as a level 0, cost 0 Guardian event. It has a willpower and combat icons. It is spirit traded. Fast. Play when another investigator draws a non-peril encounter card, but before resolving that card's effects. You are considered to have drawn that card instead, and you get +2 to each of your skills while resolving that card's revelation effect. So before we talk about the actual usefulness of this card, I just want to point this out as a great example of how brilliant the faction design is in this game, because they could have just gone somewhere with like, okay, have an asset, and when you kill an enemy, you take a token off it to cancel a treachery. So it's kind of like Ward of Protection, but Guardian kind of. But it's different enough, and it feels so much more Guardian. Like, it doesn't actually cancel. It's just like, got this. I got you, fam.
Yep.
That said,
I think it's a pretty good card. Like, if you, again, it kind of fits with True Grit. If you're going to be that Guardian, the tank kind of, this is a perfect tanking card. The fact that you get +2, it's basically saying, hey, let me draw the encounter card, commit an unexpected courage to it, and you don't have to worry about it.
Yep.
Especially with enemies. I know you had a couple of these in your deck, and being able to, I was playing Rex, having you be able to just be like, oh, hey, you drew a big enemy, let me handle that, because you can't, right?
Yep.
Like, that was just fantastic. I think, obviously, in 2-player, this loses a lot of value. Don't play this in solo, this is ridiculous, obviously, because it doesn't work. But 3 to 4-player, I think this is great if you have a dedicated monster killer. And I think most of the time we did use it for enemies as opposed to treacheries.
Yeah, and that's the big thing, is I think, you can, if someone's in a bad way and they draw like the wrong treachery and you can pull it off them, great. I don't think that's going to be the average case where this is useful. I think more often than not, this is a free engage action from anywhere on the board.
Mm-hmm. One thing I will note is I believe this is the card that got errated. And it,
What?
As soon as I say the errata, you're going to be like, oh yeah, of course. It's now draws a non-peril, non-basic weakness or weakness encounter card. Because as soon as you draw a weakness, it becomes an encounter card. It's no longer a player card. But I mean...
That's new to me.
Oh, okay. Well,
but it makes sense.
Yeah. So there's that caveat. But honestly, it's one of those niche little corner cases. Card still functions as you think it would. So.
Yeah. Yeah, I like it. It doesn't go everywhere.
Nope.
It definitely just 3+ players, I think, is where you want to start looking at this. And and again, kind of going back to the deck that I use this the most in was my Mark deck.
Mm-hmm.
I started at 2 of, and then kind of by the later part of the campaign, I ended up kind of having one of these in my hand at the end of most games. So I went down to a 1 of, and I felt pretty good there.
Yeah.
But your mileage will vary depending on what you're trying to pull off of your teammates.
Yeah, and I think that too comes from the rest of the group leveling up and being able to handle more later on in the campaign as well, like small enemies or something. But
yep.
All right. Well, last card. I'm trying to think of a pun for Ever Vigilant, but I can't. So I was gonna watch out for this card. God, that's
good
horrible. So, last card, it's a Guardian event, Ever Vigilant, 0 cost, level 1, so 1 XP. It has 2 intellect pips, and it's a tactic. 1 at a time, play up to 3 assets from your hand, reducing the resource cost of each by 1. He had to give Logan credit. The man knew how to gear up for Armageddon.
I don't want to close my eyes.
I'd like to close my ears.
Yeah.
Oh.
Okay. So, go ahead and make your click economy joke.
Well, buy the click economy. So, I don't think... My knee-jerk reaction to this, I was like, oh, okay, it's 3 assets, reduce the cost of each by 1. This is a very Guardian emergency cache. Or a very Guardian uh, unleash the soul. Now I always want to say unquiche the soul, but
You're welcome.
yeah, thanks for that. But I like the design of it. It has to be a level 1 because you have to upgrade into this. Because when you do look at the, I won't say click economy, the action compression of this card, like which is the click economy, but or part of it. Anyways,
That's a fight for another time.
This is insane, right? Like you are playing one card to basically take 3 actions to play down 3 assets, plus you're saving 3 resources. Like that is action compression that is just obscene in this game.
Yes. Yes.
There is the caveat that to get the full boost of it, you want to have 3 assets that you would be putting down. But
and you want this in your opening hand.
Yeah. But at the same time, I think I'd be okay with playing 2 assets with this. Like that's still a pretty good deal. And like you said, you probably want it in your opening hand, but later on in the game, those 2 intellect pips, that's pretty good. That can help a lot of people out.
And I can't even remember what pack it came in, but we'll talk about a card that comes around later that really lets you set this up so that it's always in your opening hand. So mid to late campaign, if you've got, your suite of assets and you're ready to go, you can have this kind of just in your pocket, ready to be played. So it's definitely better once that combo piece comes out. It's stick to the plan.
Yeah.
We're not fully doing the whole spoiler thing, are we? Stick to the plan is the card I was talking about. It makes this card a lot better.
Yes.
But yeah, no, I would agree that click economy,
action compression,
things aside, actions are the most valuable currency in this game. So any way which you can usefully save them is gonna get a thumbs up from me. Although I will say I have actually used this card very little, but that's because I play pure Guardian not that often.
Yeah, that's the thing too. I think this would be very good in Mark, and possibly a Roland too, because Roland does, he flexes between the Guardian and the Seeker quite well because those are his 2 classes, obviously. But he's kind of a well-rounded in that sense. Like he's got a lot of tools for both, and I can see this fitting quite well into him. Same thing for what's his name, Yorick, actually.
Sure.
Because he's going to be playing a lot of assets because he can dig them up from the graveyard. Being able to first turn play down a couple knives for free,
Couple knives and a cat.
Yep. Yeah, look at that. 2 knives and a cat for free.
For free.
Oh, value.
Well, I think we found Scott's level 0 build for Carcosa Iron Man.
And Ever Vigilant will come right up behind it. Although I think Stick to the Plan is 3 XP, so...
Oh, it sure is.
In Yorick... And that's the thing, I'm glad you mentioned Stick to the Plan, because it takes Ever Vigilant from, like, a B+, to, like, A++, see me after class kind of thing,
Yeah, as long as you've got the deck composition to make sure that you're going to get the most out of this card, in that case, it's quite good. Just... Because if you think about the beginning of the game, that whole gear up phase for most investigators can last like 3 or 4 turns.
Yeah.
To be able to just hit the ground running with your kit in hand, that's solid. So yeah, maybe I need to try this. It's just not a very sexy effect is really what it is. And I think that's why I haven't played a whole lot of it. But it is very useful.
I think my dream play would be like Ever Vigilant in Roland into, I don't know, a gun, True Grit, and an art student, which then draws you 3 more cards. You play another Ever Vigilant, fill out your tableau more, and then shoot something.
It.
Like it just,
And then shoot something. Yeah. There's no enemies out on turn 1, but let's just shoot the garbage can because I feel like it.
Because I don't like the way the garbage can looked at me. Cylon. All right. Favorite card for Guardian from the Carcosa box?
Aside from Mark?
Oh, you can pick Mark. I'm okay with that.
I'm definitely gonna pick Mark because he was a lot of fun. If you're into just killing things, here I go a killing again. That's Mark for you.
Yeah, I think I'd have to go to Mark as well. Like he's just so good at what he does, and he's very straightforward. And he's one of those Guardians I would feel great teaching someone the game. Like, hey, you want to be a killer? Here's Mark.
Yep.
So right on. Well, thank you for joining us for this episode of AV Club. We'll be right back. We're going to be doing the Mystic player card review from Path to Carcosa, Sammy Sosa.
Carcosa. Carcosa.
All right. We'll be back in a minute.